Welcome to this edition of Insider Secrets, the weekly podcast that turns real estate investing goals into reality. Each show, we interview guests who are seasoned real estate professionals, actively closing and managing real estate deals. Mike is the founder of My Core Intentions and would like to help you make your real estate investing dreams a reality. Mike coaches you to buy investment real estate, creating short-term cash flow and long-term wealth. Your host and real estate coach, Mike Morawski, has more than 30 years of real estate investing and property management experience. Here's your host, Mike.
Hey, what's up, everybody? Good morning. Welcome. Glad that you're here, up bright and early. Good to see you this morning. Hey, if you're new to the show, we are here typically talking about multifamily, talking about real estate investing, passive investing. Today, we have a twist. We're going to talk a little bit different. And I'll get to that in a minute. But if you're here for the first time, make sure you smash the subscribe button on YouTube. And you're going to get notified every time we roll out some new content, every time we bring a new program, every time there's another siren that goes by, which is typical for where we record from. Hey, welcome though. And if you're on social media, Facebook, LinkedIn, love us, like us, and follow us because, like I said, ton of good content continually. So one thing I always talk about is intentionality, right? What's your intentions? What are you starting your weekend with? What are your plans for today? Is it family time? Are you doing some work? Are you taking some recreation time? What are you doing for yourself? There's a lot of talk about life, work balance, work-life balance. I think when you're an entrepreneur, what winds up happening is that it all gets convoluted. It all rolls together. Work, life, it's all one thing. So we have to be more intentional about our activities, about what we're trying to accomplish and get done in any given day or during the week. So I hope that you've set some intentions for yourself. And this is more than just goal setting, right? This is intentionality. What do I want to accomplish? A typical weekday for me, how many calls do I need to make? How many sales appointments do I need to have? What do I need to get done? If it's the weekend, what do I need to accomplish? Is it by cutting the lawn? Is it dry cleaning? Is it cleaning the pool? Whatever it is, make sure that you're being intentional with your time and your efforts so that you're always giving back and giving into somebody else. So let me talk a little bit about this morning's show. I think we're going to hit you with a twist. Many of you know my story. If you don't know my story, go to my website. I have plenty of things out there on it. But I think we all in life get faced with challenges, things come up, and we either let those dictate our future or we don't. It's a choice that we can make. And today, my guest, Brent Cassity. Brent Cassity is with Remax Gold in St. Louis, but owns a company called Nightmare Success. Wrote a book called Nightmare Success about loyalty and betrayal, actually about life behind bars. So we're going to talk about prison today. We're going to talk about some effects on people's lives, things that happen along the way, and really kind of dig into it a little bit. Hey, if you're somebody that likes that kind of stuff, stay tuned. And I always say buckle up, but today I mean buckle up. Let me bring Brent in. Good morning.
Good morning, Mike.
How's it going?
You? I'm going good.
Hey, I got to say, I've been looking forward to this. I was on your show a month ago or so, and we had a good time and really have kind of gotten to know each other here through a mutual friend, Danny Navarro, who I've really grown to really admire and appreciate from his story and journey and that. So I'm glad that he connected us. So I think that we can learn a lot from each other and continue to inspire each other along the way.
Agreed.
Hey, Brent, one question I always start my show with that I like to ask people is, in one word, what do you think best describes you personally and professionally?
I think the word that comes to mind is tenacious. Never give up. Never give up.
That's an interesting word because that's mine.
Is it really?
So we have more in common than we thought about, right? So what's cool about that, though, is here's how I learned that word. So I was selling residential real estate. I was about 3 years in, and I walk in a client's house on a listing appointment. He says, "Man, Morawski, you're the most tenacious guy I've known." And I didn't know what the word meant. And so graciously, hoping he means something good, I say, hey, thank you very much. I run right home. I grab the dictionary, look in the dictionary, and I go, shit, that is me.
That's me.
It was kind of funny, but hey, I love that. What makes you tenacious?
Well, I think that there's an old Chinese proverb that says you get knocked down 7 times, get up 8. And I think what makes you tenacious is you have to have something deep within you that you're always looking ahead and knowing why you're getting up. I think the people who get stuck are the people who get knocked down and they don't know what reason they had to get up. I think you've always got to have a reason to keep you focused that no matter what happens, I'm going to keep getting up. I'm going to keep getting stepping to where I'm wanting to go.
Yeah, makes a big difference in people's lives, doesn't it?
It does.
Listen, I know a number of guys, and I think you can relate to this, but when I was locked up, I know a number of guys that they chose to pull the covers over their heads. That
Yeah.
they just laid there, they watched TV, they ate all day, and some of us make other choices and other decisions.
I think there's an interesting, for those who've seen that movie, Shawshank Redemption, there's a lot of life lessons in that movie, but the one that really stuck out to me is you got to get busy living or get busy dying. And that doesn't matter if you're in prison or if you're out in the world, but there are two choices to make. In prison, you saw that because it was such a primitive environment. You saw the guys that had quit, had given up, and then you saw the guys that were trying to make it. How do I get through this? How do I survive? How do I better myself to get my feet under me to get out of here? And while I'm in here, I'm not going to waste time.
Yeah, absolutely, 100%. So listen, let's dive in. Why don't you talk about your history a little bit, talk about your background, and I'll probably cut you off along the way, but
Yeah, my background as a kid growing up, I had a great childhood. Lived in Southwest Missouri, Springfield. That was kind of a smaller town. It was one of those where you ride your bike around town and pick teams to play pickup basketball or baseball or whatever the case might have been. But my big thing when I was growing up was sports. That was my big outlet. I had a dad that was from a small town, won a state championship in his high school, and he went on to play D1 basketball. And so I think that kind of ingrained in me that whole sports mentality, which I also think that sports is a great equalizer when you're a kid. So I think sports growing up for kids who are still doing that in their lives, I think it's a great thing for kids to understand what it takes to be out on the field. And you don't want to be on the sidelines,
yeah,
not normally.
like
I played basketball and football, but my main passion was basketball. The funny thing was I was 6'1" in 7th grade. So I was like what felt like a 7-footer at that time. Everybody else was about 5'5". So I mean, it was domination plus. So I thought 8th grade, and I thought it'd be 6'5", and I stayed 6'1". So the NBA dreams died in my junior year. That there's not a lot of people really looking for that 6'1" white guy out there.
yeah,
Plays off guard.
yeah. Well, I think back in the Bulls though, in their three-peats twice in a row, you had Steve Kerr, and that was about it. Steve
Oh
Kerr.
yeah. Yeah. You just don't want to peak your freshman, sophomore year. You want to continue to get either bigger or better. But the other part of my world is that I mentioned my dad had great parents. I had both my grandparents that I was very close to. But the one strange thing that happened in my life is my dad went to prison.
Hmm.
And he was such a big person in my world. He graduated #1 in his law school class. He won big cases as soon as he got out. He got into business and real estate. And he was just like, man, like when I was 7th, 8th grade, I was like, God, I want to be that guy. And one night he pulled us in, and my brother and I, and said, boys, I got something I need to talk to you about. And he said, the bank that I own, I've gotten into a heap of trouble, and I'm being investigated by the federal government. It's gone from bad to worse. And I think I'm going to work out a plea bargain to get this behind us as a family. And Mike, it was like when he was saying that, it was like his mouth was moving, but I was thinking, how in the world, this guy that I idolize, the guy that has the golden touch, how is he saying this? And about the time his words came back, and to get a clean break, we're going to move to St. Louis, Missouri. And I was like, oh man, this is like the worst family meeting you could ever have, is what I thought is in that time of my life. And the thing that happened though is I wouldn't be the person I am today if I hadn't had dad in my life. But one of the things that I found is he ended up going to prison. We moved to St. Louis. A couple of strange things. Back then there wasn't Google. So when we moved into the neighborhood, dad wasn't there. And so it was strange because we had this elephant in the room, people coming over, neighbors, nice people trying to introduce themselves to us. And mom's not a widow and she's not divorced. So like, where's the dad? So we decided what we're going to do is just say, dad's out of town working. And that's who we go see him every weekend. And it was somewhat true. I mean, he was out of town. He was in Marion, Illinois, in prison, and he was working in the kitchen. But it was strange to have that in a new world. Nobody knows what in the world's going on with you. But I remember driving down there, the first time we were driving down there, I was thinking, wow, what a weird thing this is that we're that family now. We are driving every weekend to see my dad in prison. And before that, we had been a pretty well-to-do family. And it was such an adjustment, mind adjustment. But I remember going that first visit and thinking when he rounds that corner, is he going to be like dad or is he going to be prison dad? I mean, how's he going to look? And surprisingly, I think he put it on a good face too, but he was fine and doing okay. But I remember the thing that I thought when I walked to that parking lot after that visit was, this will never happen to me. No matter what I do in my life, from here on out, from 15 years old on, this will never happen. I'll never find myself here.
So you were 15 when that
I was
all
15.
happening?
Yeah. And then 47 years old, I was standing at the gates of Leavenworth. And how that all transpired, my dad got out. He hit the ground running with the one company that survived that was not a sexy company. It was a company that prearranged people's funeral services ahead of time, take the burden off the family so that the family didn't have to deal with it at the time. And it solved a real problem, and it was growing. And I couldn't have been more proud of him. He got out of prison. The reason why he had that company is he put it in a family trust. His name wasn't on it. And that company began to grow. As I was getting out of college, my goal in life was I was going to be a trial attorney, like those fancy guys you see on TV, and I'd taken theater, and I was going to just go out and get it. My thing was, I graduated, I wasn't great. I graduated with like a 3.4, wasn't a 4.0 student or anything, but I had a heck of a time with standardized tests. I mean, I would register on the dumb scale when it came to standardized tests. I always blame it on being left-handed, but I've come across a lot of really smart left-handed attorneys. So I don't know what my issue was, but I had a fork in the road in my life at that point. No MBA. And now maybe I might not get the law school deal. Political science degree and a theater degree wasn't going to kick it out into another option for me. So I had done sales over the course of my college career. And I liked it. It had a good rhythm and flow to it. It was kind of like playing sports. You close a deal, you kind of had a scoreboard. If you're good, you get to play. It didn't matter how old you were. So I went to my dad and I said, Dad, I'm thinking about maybe entering this company of ours. But Dad was always the biggest cheerleader. Oh my God, you'd be great at that. You got these leadership qualities and these natural sales. And I said, but Dad, hold on. The one thing is that you cast such a big shadow. Is there any place I could just go pass fail? Just see if Brent can make it. And he said, well, yeah, son. He said, we just opened up Texas. He said, we signed a funeral home down there to represent. It's in Austin. I said, sign me up. I packed up my car, moved down there. And Mike, it was in my wheelhouse. It really felt natural. And some of those directing classes I had in theater, I would almost say to anybody who's in business, that's one of the best things to do if you're going to try to build and create a team, because it's all about people. Do they believe it? Do they believe the characters? Do they believe the emotions on stage? Do they feel what you're trying to convey? And I think that has a lot to do with building a company. So I grew a region down there, promoted myself to regional vice president. We won all divisions of the national contest. So Dad was more than happy to throw the keys over to this 20-something kid, because at that time we had grown into having our own insurance company that actually funded those contracts. So Dad went his way, and this 20-something kid went into starting to build. We were in 3 states at the time. When we were done, we were in 25 states, 2,500 funeral homes. When I said that was a non-sexy company, we created somewhat of a sexy company in the funeral industry because there wasn't anything going on different in the funeral industry in the last 125 years. And it came from a family cassette tape. My brother found a cassette tape of my grandmother who died 3 years prior. He came downstairs. He said, check this out, guys. And we sat around the table and said, wow, it was her voice. And we started talking about, isn't it crazy? You lose the inflection of somebody's voice, the way they talk and laugh just in that short amount of time. We started talking about, isn't it strange that presidents, movie stars, all the important people, they have the highlight film of their life. And like Queen Elizabeth died, and just imagine if the only thing that you got was the funeral arrangement or funeral services are Sunday at 11 o'clock. You'd be thinking, well, where's everything else? But we don't do that for our grandparents and our uncles and aunts and our parents. So we started talking about, why don't we become the filmmakers for everybody else? So that led us into a world where we created a production company. We started buying cemeteries, which is a lot like real estate, Mike. You're just selling it very small, but water, features, location, everything plays into that, which I loved. I loved the idea of creating something in cemeteries where something has permanence to it. But we injected technology. So we created touchscreen consoles on our cemeteries that we own. The production people would go out of the people who own cemetery property, and they would take them through their scrapbook and have them start talking about their life, from the earliest memories to when they had kids and they got married and their jobs. And it was great. We did over 20,000 of these life stories, and it got a lot of attention. Because it was something totally different than anything else that was going on in the world of the funeral industry. So we got covered in the Wall Street Journal and Time Magazine and Fortune and Forbes. And then HBO came along and did a entry called The Young and the Dead that spawned the HBO TV series 6 Feet Under, which my brother ended up becoming a writer on. So yeah, it was a great show.
Yeah.
Great show. And it was really good. At that time, I had met my wife in the neighborhood when I was 15 and she was 13. And so we had kind of gone through every life stage together and had 3 beautiful daughters, and they were in private schools. And I had a country club membership, and we had a vacation home. And I couldn't have felt any more accomplished when I was 40 years old. I just felt like I was at the top of the world. And I think for those guys out there that are entrepreneurs, that's sometimes when a blind spot can hit you right upside the head and knock you sideways, because when you get on a roll like that, it gets easy. And I think it's something you and I talked about, Mike, on my podcast with you, is that it gets intoxicating. You get into the flow of everything seems like it's coming up roses. I was at a gas station one day and I was filling up my gas tank, and a phone rang, pulled it out, fumbled it out of my pocket. And it was the president of our insurance company, which I didn't talk to very often, which was one of my problems with the rest of my story. Because I always just thought that insurance company, I didn't like math, but I thought, hey, I fill that up and they take care of it. He called me up and he said, Brent, I just had the weirdest phone call, strangest phone call. He said, there's a lady that called me from the Department of Insurance Investigative Division in Ohio. And she said that she has information on our company that'll bring our company down. And I'll tell you, Mike, it was like a cold chill went up my spine. And I had felt this before, but it was different this time. When my dad told me that at that little family get together back when I was 14 years old, I felt bad for him and I knew my life was going to change. But this felt tremendously different because I was in this storm now. And I knew if this was being said in a regulatory environment and one of the most highly regulated companies, industries there is, insurance, that this was going to be a problem. And our problem really was, you go back to how these things began, and you can almost put a pinpoint on, we had an insurance company and we had a reinsurance company. The reinsurance company was much bigger. It was the largest in the world. And for those, I don't want to get in the weeds on reinsurance. It's just, you write the business as a small insurance company and you sell that business off to the bigger one and they give you a commission back. They take the liability. So we had cut a sweet reinsurance agreement with them, and they came back to us and wanted to renegotiate. My dad, being the guy he was, wickedly smart and an attorney, looked through the contract and said, no, hell no. And at that moment, if we probably would have renegotiated that contract, things would have gone on. Maybe it would have cost us a little bit of money. What happened was an arbitration, and that's where a panel kind of figures out, how do we solve this problem? Problem with that is you go up something the size of a country and you're small, just discovery alone went from 2 million to 4 million to 8 million to 12 million, and it started hitting our capital and surplus. Something like that hitting your capital and surplus and having that type of an impact catches the eye of regulators. And not just one, but we were 25, and that became a firestorm. Dad came to me and he said, Brent, he said, we've got a heck of a problem here. And he said, I can't go talk to these people because I'm an ex-felon. He said, we've got to have a voice to talk. And he said, I really think that you would be a good voice for us to go to these people. And I was like, man, Mike, I was thinking, this is the one company that I really didn't pay attention to. The one that I arrogantly thought, doesn't matter. We'll just take it, put it over there, pays for everything at the time it needs to be paid. And this was time that I had to really dig in and figure out what in the world was I talking about and how was I going to defend what we were doing. So I set off into a path to go to talk to these regulators with attorneys and so on, really basically running into a burning house. And I wanted to do it. At that age, I was arrogant enough and cocky enough to think that we had 400 or 500 people working with us. And I wanted to show everybody that I could save the day and put the cape on and be the hero. And there were days that I thought that we were going to be able to do that. There were days that I thought I had it worked out and that we were going to be able to avoid the crisis. And in the end, I didn't. We ended up going into receivership that led to a criminal investigation that led to 6 years of going through, being investigated, and 3 years of being indicted, and all being a public spectacle. It was a nightmare beyond nightmares that I could ever imagine. I can't imagine wishing that on anyone. And anybody who's gone through that, it's one of those things, if you feel like you're a person who likes to be in control, your world spins out of control. And it's almost like you fall into a hole and you think you can grab the sides, and the sides keep grabbing and getting wider and wider, and you just keep falling deeper and deeper. You go to bed with it, you wake up with it, and you just fight. It got to a point where my daughters, who were teenagers, and my wife, we had kind of gotten into a bubble where we had really good support with friends and teachers and coaches, and we'd stayed in that bubble. But when we got down to the end of this, my daughter said, Dad, there's just no way. We've had a tsunami of bad here. You can't go any further with this. And at that time, when it gets close to a trial, the federal people always come to you with a plea. And I knew at that time, even though I was so used to fighting, that I was worn out, I was broke, and I knew it was time to give in. And I remember the night that it kind of was all coming down. I was going to go plead the next day, and my kids were up at our vacation home with my wife, and I was on the phone with my mom, my dad, my brother, and my wife, and we were just kind of talking about how are we going to navigate this going forward. Dad's going to go to prison. I'm going to go to prison. There's 4 other people that are going to go to prison. And when I got off the phone that night, it was the first time, Mike, that it hit me that, wow, I hadn't contemplated this next step. I'm going to be a felon. I'm going to go to prison. When I get out of prison, I'm going to be an ex-felon. How do I live as an ex-felon? Do I want to live as an ex-felon? And what does that mean for the people around me? My wife, does she need this stain, or does she need a fresh start? My kids, can they live with a dad in their life that's always going to be branded as an ex-felon? I was drinking alone in our house, which is never a good formula.
Been there, done that.
And it just was one of those things where it caught up to me, where I felt like blaming and sorry for myself. And how did I get here? And why did this happen? And I had another drink and got worse. And it brings the hairs up on my arms when I talk about this because I'm not this person, but I grabbed a piece of paper and I started writing all the people who have been such a support to me. My wife, who had just been a warrior, the perfect wife, my kids, all the fatherly advice I could give them, and got another drink, grabbed the keys to the car and went to the garage, turned it on. And I didn't know if I was going to go run into a tree or just let the car run. And Mike, it was like something hit me. And I feel like it happened like yesterday. Something hit me in like a bolt. It's like, my God, Brent, what are you doing? What are you thinking? This could be the worst legacy that you could ever conceive for your wife and kids of how you handled this situation. And it was at that moment, because I was thinking to myself, you're the guy, half full guy. You're the solution guy. And at that moment, it became crystal clear to me the difference between a victim and a survivor. Victim balls up in a fetal position, points fingers at everybody, and it takes all your strength away. But a survivor just gives you a different feeling, even saying the word, that you stand up a little differently, you think differently, you react differently. And at that moment, I thought, no matter what happens to me, everything in front of me looked very scary. I didn't know how long I was going to prison. I didn't know where I was going to prison. But I thought, no matter what happens from this point forward, at my rock bottom moment, I'm going to stand tall. My people that are around me are at least going to be proud of how I'm handling this situation. So for me, when I went to voluntarily surrender at the gates of Leavenworth, I'd really already hit my rock bottom moment a few weeks before. And so I kind of gathered myself on how I would handle this, because it's a strange thing when you stand at the gates. Everything you know and love is behind you, and all the unknown that you're stepping into is in front of you. And it's a really strong, deep moment for you personally, because you don't have a choice. You've got to step forward regardless.
Brent, let's back up for one quick second if we can. What was the exact charges or allegations against you that caused you to go to prison? What did they say you did?
So the big thing that I had as a personal thing is that there's a lot of laws on the books. And one that had happened in 94, Congress passed a law that an ex-felon cannot work in the business of insurance. And the way that our company was structured, my dad was an ex-felon, and we, being the trust, owned the company. So me, being the CEO, was allowing my dad to work in the business of insurance. That carried a 5-year sentence.
And let's be clear on this. You guys owned this company before your dad went to prison the first time.
Right. So yes, we could have and should have been able to understand and unwrap that from all the attorneys that we had, but we did not. And so that law stood out there. That was one that I couldn't get away from, because if I went to trial, whether it was intentional or unintentional, I was in a position that I was responsible to know that law.
Are you ready to skyrocket your investment portfolio and leave a legacy? Are you tired of inconsistent returns received in the stock market? Then it's time you take a look at alternative investment options, like a passive investment in multifamily real estate. No tenants, trash, or toilets. Just a solid return on an annual investment, including quarterly returns along the way. These lower risk and secure assets are also a great hedge against inflation. If you want to hear more about these types of opportunities, email me directly to schedule a 15-minute consultation to see if you qualify. You can email me at mike@mycoreintentions.com.
The rest of our charges really were about how we funded and what the value of our insurance policies were when they went into trust, whether they were valued at the face amount or the cash amount. And that's a really 12 million document discovery on talking about that. But really what it came down to was, our business sustainable going forward? We've been in business for 30 years, but they believed that the way that we ran the business, that it wasn't sustainable as a company with our business plan. That led to anything that we had bought over those 30 years was money laundering. Anything that we mailed was mail fraud. anything we wired was wire fraud. As you know how those things go, Mike, those are 4 charges, but they can stack on all of those on each silo. So with those 4 charges and stacking them, I was looking at about 900 years. And it was more than you can think in your mind when you're thinking about, what do I do next? Am I going to trial? Am I not going to trial? But the biggest one that I had was, and it was a conspiracy too. So when you have a conspiracy, you have to defend all people in the conspiracy to prove the overall, to be proven innocent in the overall charging. So it was a big company that, I say it's a big company, it was a medium-sized company that we became a target in the world of the regulatory world. And so it was something that was hard to put your arms around, of what are your next steps if you were going to go and fight something. 97% of the people who are indicted plea. And I think most of that comes down to, how can you go into the courtroom and be successful? I think in our justice system, it is innocent until proven guilty. I've dealt with the fact that there were a multitude of things that I should have done much differently as a CEO of a company that had an insurance company. My oversight was not what it should have been. And there were things that I should have done that would have protected us, and that didn't happen. And there's things too, when you think about their family businesses, a lot of people say, it'd be great to go into a family business. It is, but there's a couple of other things about family businesses too. You can't get away from it. You go on vacations and trips and whatever, and eventually it gets around the table and everybody's talking business. It's kind of like having the Beatles and Fleetwood Mac and the Eagles. Everybody's wanting to be the lead singer. So you have that dynamic. We fortunately didn't have a whole lot of that, because all of us kind of had our different ways that we were getting and growing the business. But it's something to think about too when you're thinking about family businesses, because there's a lot of benefits to it, but there are drawbacks of how the family survives as a corporation going forward. But I think you asked what the charges were. They were big charges that, when you're dealing with money laundering, wire fraud, mail fraud, those are charges that are complicated and not easy to get away from.
Let's fast forward a little bit. Obviously, you go to prison, your dad goes to prison, 4 other people are affected and go to prison, but the effect is deeper than that. It's not just you facing those gates and saying, oh, what the hell did I do to my life, or what's my life going to look like tomorrow? But there's wives, there's children, there's other people that are affected by this. We're the most incarcerated country in the world. And the number is somewhere between 25 and 30% of the US population has been touched in some way by somebody being incarcerated, whether it was a business partner, whether it was a sibling, whether it was a spouse or a child. And those effects run deep on people. And I think that you're somebody, obviously you stayed married, and your kids are still solid in your life. Where it went opposite for me, and which is a shame, but it's not easy to keep that together. Can you talk about that a little bit?
Yeah, because it wasn't normal. I realize that I'm one of the lucky ones. And it sounds somewhat strange to say I went to prison and got sentenced to 5 years, and I say I'm one of the lucky ones, but I saw so many guys that I was close to that lost everything. I lost everything material. I didn't lose my family. I think when someone goes to prison, the whole family goes to prison, and everybody has to deal with it on their own terms, and they have to lean on each other to deal with that. I give so much credit to my wife. She is really the hero in this story, because how she handled the situation. I think the time period of this going on and the ages of my kids, they saw her as a role model of, how do you handle something that's so unforeseen, so unexpected, the worst nightmare, and still thrive and still become the mother and the person who's pushing things forward. She was so good about all of that and kept the girls going. And we joked about it. We had the Leavenworth Express because my kids were at Mizzou, so it went through there to Leavenworth, and she'd pick up 1 or 2 or 3 of them every once in a while on those weekends. And she came every weekend. And I'll tell you what I think really was the glue to it is her doing that, because by her being there and me being able to go to a visit, straddle the fence, understand what's going on the other side of our world with the kids and friends and everything else that was going on, us as a marriage was able to stay together, plugged into each other's lives. And I think one of the things that happens when somebody goes to prison is that gets frayed and frazzled to where they lose contact, because that person's going and fighting the fight out in the real world, and you're encapsulated and segregated off to this world where it's not. So I think that was the magic formula for us, is that we stayed connected weekly, and my kids did too. And we were able to lean on each other through the hard times and share the good times, because there were good times also. I mean, my youngest daughter won a state championship, and I remember playing state tennis, and I remember I was trying to make those phone calls, and you get on a phone and then you can't talk for 30 minutes. I was trying to follow that set. But those moments that I still had them in prison because of how we decided to handle the new weird normal. And for so many people, they didn't get that opportunity because life happened and it frayed off to the side. So, Mike, I was just so incredibly lucky at 15 years old to understand that this 13-year-old girl at that time was going to be such an incredible mother, wife to go through, because we were living a very good life. And she was living that life, and the kids were living that life. And she just buckled in and said, okay, we're going to get through this. My kids worked through college. My kids do very well now, all accomplished. I couldn't be prouder of them. So it's just a testament. I give most of the credit to Julie.
Hey, I just want to circle back real quick, and I want people to grab hold of this, what you kind of alluded to about the telephone situation, kind of the same situation with email when you're in federal prison. You get 15-minute time blocks. So you can talk to somebody on the phone, you can email for 15 minutes, and then the system shuts you out, and you've got to wait 30 minutes to get back on. And you're trying to do that in between count times and work time and travel time and movement time. And I just want people to get, because a lot of times people say, hey, what was it like for you in there? I tell people, I say, hey, ask me anything except what I ate. Because you and I could talk about Tuesday cheeseburgers and Thursday fried chicken, the terrible scrambled eggs on Sunday morning. I always say prison was like you died and you were watching your life go on without you.
Yes.
Because people move forward. And they said when you went to prison that it preserves you. And I came home, I was in the best shape of my life physically. And it's because I worked out, I took care of myself. I can't say I ate right, but I did take care of myself and worked out and exercised and meditated and prayed and did all that kind of stuff. But here's what I want you to talk about. Talk about your redemption piece, that tenacity that kept you going to the redemption piece to where you're at today and what you're doing today.
Yeah, because that's a good question, Mike, because you can only go one or two ways in prison. And you see people come out in the best shape of their life, or they come out the heaviest they've ever been and the worst shape of their life. There's like no in between. I remember so vividly of walking the fence at Leavenworth next to the barbed wire fence and on the sidewalk. And I was thinking, my God, Brent, this is the worst. I mean, you are walking the fence of Leavenworth. What do you do now? Where do you go now? And kept thinking and thinking, why don't I use, this has been an incredible ride, an incredible journey. And I want to use this journey to help others, show them that you can hit rock bottom, but it can be a new beginning. And I started toying around with the words, because people always say, Brent, do you know nightmare and success really don't go together? Like, where did you come up with that? And I really thought about it when I was walking the fence, and I thought about two words that are always together, but we don't put them together. It is nightmare success, because anything that you're going to go do in life that's out of your comfort zone, you're going to have to walk through your fears. You're going to have to walk through the things that make you nervous, the things that are scary, to get to that thing that sets you free to your own success. And so whether we think they're together or not, they're always together, nightmare success.
Yeah.
And so I started thinking about what can I do when I get home to continue to stay in my passion. And I think one of the things that I found is the only thing that walks you through your scary points or your nervous or your fear, your nightmare is having a passion, because that's the thing that wills you to walk over, under, around that fear. And that passion thing is something they want to know that they talk about in Shawshank. Andy Dufresne, he talks about the widest of the white sands, the bluest of the blue waters. He's going to fix up that old fishing boat, take his friends out on. He's got the little shack on the beach that he's going to fix up so his friends can watch the sun go down and have a drink. You can see it in his eyes when he talks about that. You can feel it. And that's what keeps him chipping through 19 years to his freedom. And every day he rewards himself with the pockets, the holes in his pockets to let that wall out into the yard. That's what you have to find in anything that you're doing. And a lot of people just don't take the time to figure out what it is that really gets you going, that you feel down to your soul. Because if you get there, you're willing then to walk through whatever that is, because you know why you're going to the other side.
Yeah. Did you write your book in prison or out?
Well, I wrote it out. I thought about writing it in prison, and I didn't know if I was in the right mindset to really be reflective enough. And writing the book was also cathartic for me because I went through my life. And as I thought back, I probably was more reflective of how I handled prison, because I really started thinking about, okay, what did I do? How did I do it to survive the way I wanted to survive? And I think while I was doing it, I don't think I was as aware of the tools I was using until once I got out.
Yeah, it's crazy. So while you were in, did you do any service work? Did you help other guys? What was that like?
I did. I found we had this, I went through RDAP, which was the only way that you could get a year off prison, which was rational thinking, behavioral thinking. And one of the classes we had was about goal setting and business planning. And they would give one or two inmates the subject topic. And it was like, okay, I got this one. I know this one. This is one I don't have to do any research on. So I got up there and I started talking about it. And it was really something that I had guys come up to me. They said, man, Brent, you got like a minute? Like we could talk about, I got this idea, like what do I do with it? And so I started helping guys just get out of their heads what they were and a lot of these guys, interestingly enough, I'll say this. One of the biggest things that came to me in prison was that there were a lot of good guys in there, smart guys, made mistakes, but never judging a book by its cover. I always want to hear the story of how did you get here? Why did you get here? Hear about where they are now. So when I started talking to these guys, some of them were drug dealers. And I realized that a lot of these guys, if they just set up their business as they set up the structure that they had distribution, they had incentives, they had hierarchy, promotions, all those things within their structure. We just need to take it and make it what it would be for a lawn care business or whatever else that they were looking at to be able to make that work on the right side.
Yeah.
And so I really got a lot out of that. There were other things that helped me feel like me, because I always say one of my tools is don't give in, don't give up, keep being yourself regardless of the circumstances. Otherwise, you'll lose what makes you you. And I was the clerk of the food warehouse. And so I was very involved in all that food that came in and where it came from and filing all that away and getting forklift certified, which I would have never gotten forklift certified in my life. But I can drive a pretty good forklift, Mike.
Let's be clear on this. You went from making hundreds of thousands of dollars a year to making 17 a month.
Yeah, right. Exactly.
I had that job for a while too.
The other thing that you come to is that when you have all this on the outside and then you realize that your world has come down to a bunk bed, a plastic chair, and a locker. And you can still adapt through that. I always say to people when I'm talking to other people is that nothing is as bad as your mind makes it out to be, not even prison. What we build up on our minds, when I was standing at the gates of Leavenworth, I thought I was going to die. That was my first thought. Second thought, I'm going to get raped. Third thought, I'm going to get beat up. And your mind has such a way of playing things out that doesn't allow you to step forward. Well, in this situation, you had no choice. You had to step forward. You had to get into this environment. But interestingly enough, even in a primitive environment, you can find things that help you continue to be you, and you don't have to become institutionalized in an environment unless you want to be. Like you said, Mike, you can work out, you can read books, you can get a good prison job, you can stay connected to people that you have something in common with. One of the things that I noticed when I first went in was, and this is good for anybody going into anything, don't say a whole lot when you get there. Look around, see what's going on, see who's getting it right, see if it's something that you could implement into your routine to help you get through your stint. And then I would go up and talk to him like, hey, Mike, you're reading a lot of books, man. Where are you getting your books from? Or, man, what a routine you've got working out. You think I could jump in here with you? If not, can I just get your routine so I can start working out? Those things helped me steady myself to feeling like I was still being myself. I think when you start falling into an environment that's not what you're used to, and then you start acting like that environment, that's when you lose yourself.
100%. So a couple things interesting, right? I think when I went away for the first 18 months, I cried every day in prisons.
Yeah.
And I did it publicly. And as a result of that, I wound up making friends with some guys that you wouldn't normally be friends with. But here's what's interesting, and you kind of alluded to this a couple minutes ago. There was a guy, and I taught classes. So I taught real estate investing, property management, ethics for 6 years. And there was a guy the night before he went home, and this was a guy, he was second in charge of a pretty big name gang, actually from St. Louis. We were sharing a bowl of food the night before he went home, and he looked at me across that bowl of food, and he said, if I'd have known I could have made this much money selling real estate, I'd have never sold drugs. And that still makes the hair on the back of my neck stand up, because you know what? When you can make a difference in somebody's life, behind bars, outside of prison, you're making a difference in somebody's life.
And I think that fills you up. When I wrote the book, I was going on other podcasts and being a guest. And I told Julie one night, we were walking the dogs, I said, I think I'm going to do a podcast. And she said, well, really? What's your podcast going to be? I said, I got 50 guys on my Facebook that went to Leavenworth. I said, I really want a podcast. It's not going to be, even though it's all prisoners, ex-felons that I'm interviewing, it's going to be about hope and inspiration. It's going to be about dealing when your worst fear becomes your reality. How do you adapt, survive, and overcome it? And so my podcast became a real passion of mine, because I want everybody who listens to that, yes, it's interesting because they went to prison. I get that. I want them to know the stories that some of these people make it, and they become second chance at life. There's a guy that he spent 3 years at Leavenworth as an inmate, and he is now the current mayor of Leavenworth, Kansas. There's just some really incredible stories that usually don't get uncovered because we're always pushing the bad. Everything's horrible. This is a terrible system, which everybody would agree, but there's no success stories. My podcast is about people who haven't given up, who believe in themselves enough to ask for help and get to the next stage of their life. And what I think happens with that, if people come in thinking, well, it's kind of interesting because these people went to prison, but they come out with, wow, there's some commonality there. I could have gotten into that mess right there. In the end, I think what happens is that they see strategies that they could possibly use in their life to get themselves unstuck. And the end result, hopefully, if they come across a Brent or a Mike or someone else, is maybe I should give these guys a second chance. Maybe they're not just prison creatures. Maybe they're really trying to get by.
Yeah. And I think people need to realize that you can't judge a book by its cover. You said that. There's hope and inspiration in what we both talk about. And I really believe so many people are locked in other prisons, right? Drug abuse, gambling, sex abuse, verbal abuse, past history. You know what? You can't be locked in. You're trapped in a prison that's worse than you and I being behind the fence,
Yeah.
right? So people need to realize you can't let your past define your future, that you can move forward. Because now, today, you're licensed as a real estate agent, right?
I'm not licensed, actually. I teach people how to sell and do business plans.
Got it. Got it. But I got approved by the SEC to go back and
I
do
know,
it.
and I think that's incredible.
Hey, listen, we can all walk through those tough times, those fiery times. And obviously you've done that. And congratulations to you and Julie and your daughters. And how long you been home now?
It's been 6 years. Yeah.
Did you know a guy named Paul Hartfield,
Yes. He's been on the podcast.
opera singer?
Yeah.
Yeah.
I forget what episode he is, but he was in the first year on the podcast.
He's a great friend of mine. And we met in Duluth.
Super nice guy.
Yeah. Yeah. Did you know Tommy Doyle?
Yeah, I believe I did know Tommy
Art guy,
Doyle.
art guy from New York.
Yeah.
Yeah, because they both went to Leavenworth about the same time. So I figured they were there when you were there. Hey, Brent, so tell people how they can get your book, how they can connect with you, why they
Yeah.
should connect with you.
Yes. So one of the easier ways to get a hold of me is brentcassity.com. And I spell it wrong. I spell it Cassity. I grew up wanting to be Sean and David Cassidy, but they were DY. I'm easy to get to on Facebook, Instagram, TikTok. It's at Brent Cassity. And you can get my book, Under Success. You can get my book on Amazon, Barnes and Noble, Walmart even has that. So check that out. I'm pretty easy to get and run down. I'd love to go back and forth too with people on leaving messages on my website. I'll get right back to you if you leave
How
one.
did you get your book into Walmart? We should probably have a conversation about that.
Yeah, it all happened through the distribution. I didn't even realize it was in Walmart, and you kind of watch what your book's doing, and I all of a sudden saw that it was being distributed in Walmart. So I wish I could tell you how that happened, Mike.
Oh, nice. Good for you. I always ask those fun bonus questions at the end, but I'm not going to ask you my typical ones. So I want to know how many books you read while you were in prison.
Yeah. Okay. So I really actually read a book a week. And it was crazy because my wife would send me the Amazon deal because they'd show up there. And I was one of the guys that had books. And we filled up a lot of that library because I would pass those out and they'd pass it. We'd go through, and it was fun to see these guys. A lot of the guys usually didn't read, and they got into some of these books. And it was fun to kind of share back and forth what they were thinking about these different books they were reading. So yeah, a book a week for 3 years.
Wow, good for you. And what was the best book you read?
I read a lot of fiction when I was in prison because it was like an escape for me. And my favorite guy, and you don't hear him very often, his name is Greg Iles. He writes big books. He's fascinating because he truly is an attorney. He is from Nacogdoches, Mississippi. And everything he writes about is in that town. And it's got series of books that you can read through. But of fiction, Greg Iles is an incredible author.
Awesome. Hey, so have you ever been to Zihuatanejo?
No, but I'd like to go.
It's beautiful.
It sounds beautiful.
It is beautiful. I went a number of years ago after watching Shawshank. Yeah. Hey, this has been a blast. Appreciate you. Appreciate getting to know you a little bit more and having you on, sharing some information and your vulnerability. Thank you. It's not easy for any of us, for you or I, to go out there. But I think the best way to handle what happened is to handle what happened and talk about it. And I think that in the business world, we get a lot of respect for that. My good friend tells me all the time, he says, you're going to be the Michael Milken of multifamily. And I believe that.
He's a hero of mine. Michael Milken is definitely. I want to leave one little analogy story for all those who, whether you're in real estate or trying to start a business. There was a guy, Damon West, who was a football player down in Texas, got into drugs, having a really tough time in prison. He was going in and out of the hole, was getting beaten up. He was just doing hard time. An old inmate came up to him. He said, Damon, you're not going to make it in here if you keep doing your time like this. You got to understand this prison yard is like a boiling pot of water. He said, are you following me? And he said, well, yes, I'm listening. So he said, if I put a carrot in that water, what's the water do to the carrot? He said, well, it makes the carrot soft. He said, that's right. He said, you can't get soft in here. He said, get soft in here, you can get hurt. And people take advantage of you. He said, if I put an egg in that water, what's the water do to the egg? He said, well, the egg gets hard. He said, you can't get too hard in here because you got to have empathy. You can't lose your heart. He said, if I put a coffee bean in that water, what's the coffee bean do to the water? He said, I don't know if I'm following. I don't know. He said, the coffee bean changes the water to coffee. He said, you've got to be the change. Be the coffee bean and change the water, not let the water change you.
What a great story. Love that. Hey, I'm going to move you out to the back room. I'm going to say goodbye. Appreciate you. Love you, man. Hang with me for a few minutes, okay?
Thanks, Mike. I appreciate it.
Hey, everybody. A little bit longer episode today. That's okay. I think the message is a message everybody needs to hear. Success, loss, failure, call it whatever you want. It's not failure. I always say it's not what happened to us, but what happened for us, right? And Brent is a great example of that. And it's the redemption. His word was tenacity, right? Tenacity to move forward, to do the next right thing, to keep plugging away no matter what your circumstance is, no matter what your situation is. I hope you go back and listen to this again or pass this on to somebody else that you think might need to hear it, because there's more to life than getting hung up on our past or on a failure. I just want that for you. Here's a suggestion for you. Go grab a copy of Brent's book and go to Zihuatanejo and spend a couple days, take some time, think about your life, think about your situation. Hope I didn't rock your world too much, but maybe I do hope I rocked your world. Hope you got a lot out of this. Be blessed. Have a great week, everybody.
Thank you, Mike, and thank you for joining us for another great episode of Insider Secrets. As always, Insider Secrets is brought to you by My Core Intentions. Wherever you hang out on social media, you will find Mike and My Core Intentions. Please like and follow us to get the most up-to-date real estate investing trends. Visit mycoreintentions.com, where you can get expert coaching on all things real estate investing and property management. If you're looking to become an expert, Mike's coaching will help you scale your real estate investment business. We're looking forward to having you back again next week for more Insider Secrets.